They weren't supposed to survive the storm. But when Federal Ranger May Whitaker veered off course in the heart of a Montana blizzard, what she found beneath the frozen pines was no accident. Two Mustangs, one defiant, one trembling, shackled to a dying tree with chains meant for prisoners, not animals. Pinned to the bark, a rain-soaked note, "Forgive us." It's too late. May thought she was saving horses. She didn't know she was unlocking the remains of a military experiment buried deeper than the snow. And some creatures don't forget what they were trained to do. Before we dive in, let us know where you're watching from. And if you enjoy this story, don't forget to subscribe. May Whitaker had always believed in silence, the kind that blanketed the world between midnight and dawn, and the hush of snowfall. In a forest so deep, the rest of Montana faded to memory. For 5 years, that silence had kept her company on the edge of the Blacktail Mountains, far from the rumors and half-spoken sympathy that followed her after she lost Echo the warhorse that had once carried her through fire and back. Out here, she lived alone, tucked inside a ranger's cabin with nothing but a wood stove, a battered field radio, and the static buzz of an old satellite phone for company. There was no television, no internet. Just the wind through the pine needles, the crackle of the fire, and the dull ache of memories she no longer cared to name. That night, as a December blizzard began to carve its name into the valley, May cinched her jacket tighter, slid a heavy canvas duffel onto the seat beside her, and fired up the ancient Chevy pickup she kept for runs into Bear Hollow. Her hands calloused and sure-checked the inventory for the 3rd time: insulin, antibiotics, bandages, all the things the outpost clinic might need, before the storm sealed off the roads for days, maybe longer. It was routine, supposed to be routine. A run through the pines' tires, chained for ice headlights, splitting the whiteout like knife blades. Outside, the wind screamed down the mountain. It rattled the windows and whistled between the logs of the cabin, biting through May's gloves as she scraped the windshield free of snow. She'd heard the forecast on the radio that morning, blizzard warning all unnecessary travel discouraged. But out here, necessity was the only rule. If Bear Hollow didn't get their meds, people might die. So she drove boots tapping a silent rhythm on the floorboard face set, and unreadable in the half-light of the dashboard. The world beyond the glass was a shifting, colorless void. Snow came in sideways, needling the pickup's beams until everything beyond a dozen yards was nothing but swirling gray. Pine boughs bowed under the weight branches, groaning as the wind snapped overhead. May could barely make out the old marker posts, rusted metal crusted in ice, that signaled the edge of Ranger Road 12. The loneliest stretch of mountain highway she knew. Somewhere out there, a tree cracked in the cold, echoing like a rifle shot through the frozen dark. She didn't notice the sound at first. Maybe it was just the wind, she told herself, or the snow rattling loose from the high branches. But as the truck crawled past mile marker 9, something reached through the white noise, a thin, strangled cry, not quite human, not quite animal. May's hand drifted to the radio, twisting the volume down until only static filled the cab. There it was again, a rasping, broken note that shivered beneath the howling wind. She eased off the gas heart, tapping once hard against her ribs. The sound came again, higher, a desperate hiccup of breath that made her skin prickle beneath her coat. Not a wolf's didn't sound like that. Not a deer either, or any of the usual ghosts that haunted these woods. Instinct sharp, stubborn, honed by years of patrols, and too many nights spent waiting for trouble sent her searching the shadows just beyond the ditch. May thumbed the pickup into park, cut the engine. The silence that followed was absolute, broken only by the shriek of the storm and that thin, broken wail. She sat for a moment, breathing in, the cold eyes closed, as if she could listen better that way. Then she moved, no hesitation, no drama, just the economy of someone used to doing what needed to be done. She grabbed her flashlight, slipped a heavy-bladed knife into her belt, and double-checked the signal flare strapped to her hip. Before she stepped out, she thumbed the door lock and tucked the truck keys into a zippered pocket. Out here, mistakes could get you killed. The snow swallowed her boots to the ankle, drifted knee-high where the wind had funneled it against the bank. May pressed on, squinting into the darkness, her breath a white ribbon trailing behind her. The beam of her flashlight jittered as she trudged through the pines, slicing back and forth across black trunks, the ghosts of branches overhead, the endless blur of white. The sound drew her on, erratic now, sometimes muffled by the wind, sometimes so sharp it cut through the storm. She moved carefully, using the familiar shape of the land to keep her bearings here. The big granite outcrop. There, the slope that dropped away toward the frozen creek. She ducked beneath a snow-laden bough, her headlamp sending a scatter of light over the forest floor. That was when she saw it, a huddled, motionless shape, half buried beneath a massive pine. For a heartbeat, she thought it might be a downed elk or a deer frozen in the storm. But as she stepped closer, her light caught the shape of flared nostrils, a tangled mane, and the unmistakable bulk of a horse's shoulder. Two horses. Wild mustangs by the look of them. One huge and dark as shadow, the other smaller, cream-colored, trembling so hard the snow seemed to shiver around it. They were pressed so tightly to the tree trunk that at first May thought they might have frozen there. But then she saw the ropes, thick bands of nylon wide, as a man's belt looped tight around neck, belly, and legs. The knots were precise, purposeful, too deliberate to be the work of a panicked rancher or a lost hiker. These were training ropes, the kind she'd seen before in government yards or military stables, where control mattered more than kindness. The big Mustang, gray-black, with a heavy mane and deep-set eyes, stood perfectly still, watching her, unblinking. There was no fear in him, but no fight either. Just a patient, unyielding gaze, as if he were waiting for her to prove herself. The smaller one, pale with a floppy ear and legs caked in ice, twitched at every movement, sides heaving with panic and exhaustion. Blood had frozen at the join of the ropes, staining the snow in rusty patches. May's breath caught. Whoever had done this hadn't meant for them to last the night. Above their heads, lashed to the tree trunk, with a strip of black tape, fluttered a ragged scrap of nylon, maybe from an old feed bag, maybe a tent. It danced in the wind, half buried beneath a crust of ice. May flicked open her knife, pried the tape loose, and peeled the sheet-free fingers burning from the cold. The writing was faded, the ink running in blue rivulets down the plastic. But the message was clear, each letter pressed with desperate, shaking hands. Forgive us. It's too late. No name, no date, no clue, just the chill of finality in every broken curve of script. May read it 3 times, lips moving silently, trying to parse the story behind the words. Us, who the people who owned these horses, someone who loved them once, or someone who'd had no choice but to leave them behind. She crumpled the scrap and tucked it into her coat, feeling the storm tighten its grip on the world around her. Storm, the name, came to her as she studied the big Mustang. He was beautiful, battered and proud. His coat shimmered slate gray in the flashlight, his legs planted wide for balance, eyes never leaving hers. May didn't move closer, not yet. Wild horses, especially ones abused or abandoned, could lash out if they felt cornered. But he just watched, patient as an old soldier. The other Mustang, Ash, she named him for the pale gold and white of his coat and the way he seemed to be fading with each breath, whimpered softly, legs folding beneath him. May knelt beside him, careful to keep her movements slow and deliberate, Up close, she could see how swollen his ankles were, how the ropes had bitten down to raw flesh beneath the ice. "It's okay," she murmured, her voice low and steady, more for the horses than for herself. "I'm not here to hurt you." She set the flashlight in the crook of her arm and reached into her pocket for the blade hands, sure despite the numbness. With delicate precision, she slid the knife between rope and skin, working the knots loose one by one. Ash flinched as the last loop gave way, his chest heaving but didn't kick out. May stroked his neck gently, feeling the feverish heat beneath her palm. Storm still hadn't moved. May shifted her focus, working her way around him, keeping her voice soft. "You're next big guy," she said. "Let's get you out of here." The sound of the nylon tearing must have reminded him of something he stamped once, a sharp warning motion, but didn't bolt. May kept her eyes on his, reading the storm clouds in that stare. "I don't know where you came from," she whispered, "but you're not dying here." One by one, she freed the ropes, wincing at the wounds beneath. She wondered briefly how long they'd been out here one night. Too long enough for blood to freeze and for hope to fade. The snow was coming down harder now, thickening with every gust. May ran back to the truck, tugged a heavy canvas tarp from the bed, and spread it across the snow beside the Mustangs. Ash could barely stand, muscles trembling, as she coaxed him onto the makeshift sled. Storm followed at first on his own power, then stumbling, nearly falling, before May caught his halter and steadied him. She dragged the tarp, inch by inch, back to the road, teeth clenched against the cold. Ash lay curled in a shivering heap, head tucked against his chest. Storm staggered alongside, never letting May out of his sight, as if he'd already decided she was the only thing between him and oblivion. The wind picked up, howling through the trees like it wanted to rip the forest apart. Snow battered May's face, blinding her as she reached the truck and bundled both horses into the back. No easy task, and one she knew would leave her aching for days. She slammed the tailgate, wiped her brow with a trembling hand, and slid behind the wheel. As the engine sputtered to life, she glanced in the rearview mirror. Storm was watching her, eyelids fluttering. For the first time, he closed them just for a moment. A rare surrender in the wild. May exhaled, heart hammering. The blizzard was only getting worse. But tonight, at least, she wasn't the only one left fighting through the storm. The wind nearly tore the truck's door from May's hand as she dragged it shut behind her. She sat for a moment, knuckles white around the steering wheel, feeling the weight of the storm pressing against the glass, rattling the frame, howling around the cabin like something wild and wounded. She could barely see the ranger station in the swirling dark, a low, battered silhouette hunched against the pines' windows, blinking gold behind drifting curtains of snow. The Mustangs were in worse shape. Ash, trembling and exhausted, had nearly collapsed in the back. Storm, battered but unbowed, kept trying to rise every few minutes, only to lurch sideways into the cold steel. May hurried out, boots crunching in the knee-deep snow, and fumbled to open the heavy back doors. The wind snapped at her, flinging icy powder into her eyes, but she didn't flinch. She spoke quietly to them as she worked. "Easy. Not far now, I promise." Storm flicked an ear, tracking her voice. Ash just shuddered, ribs heaving with every breath. The old shed behind the cabin had once been a feed store, but May had cleaned it out for emergencies, an insulated room roof, patched with tin walls, lined with scavenged plywood and sheets of plastic. She shoved the door open and hurried inside, then dashed back through the storm to the truck. It took 3 trips to get everything: 2 heavy quilted blankets lined with reflective mylar, a thick bale of straw from the storage bin, a duffel with what medical supplies she had left, her toolkit, a lamp, and a battered field radio. The blizzard beat at her every step, slapping her face with frozen hands, but she didn't stop until the shed was ready. Storm walked in first, slow, cautious, head low, but unafraid. May guided him toward the corner, spreading the blankets into a makeshift bed on the wooden floor, then layered the straw around it in thick, golden piles. His massive frame filled the space, but he never balked, not even when the door creaked shut behind him. Ash was harder. He tried to back away from the light from the sound of her boots on the floorboards, but May moved gently, speaking low, never reaching out too fast. She coaxed him in, step by step, her breath ghosting in the cold air. "It's okay. You're safe. No one's going to hurt you." Finally, Ash staggered inside and collapsed on the straw legs, folded awkwardly beneath him. May closed the door, shutting out the storm. Inside, the only sounds were the thunder of wind against the roof and the ragged breaths of the Mustangs. May stood in the dimness for a moment, heart-thumping hands numb, and listened, just listened. She'd done her part. Now it was up to the horses to survive. She set to work layering more straw around them to keep the warmth from leaching into the earth. The generator was struggling, but a single bulb glowed from the ceiling, painting the little room in a soft yellow haze. May kicked on the portable heater, not trusting the old wood stove yet, and checked the seams of the windows for drafts. The air inside soon smelled of hay earth and a sharp, sweet musk animal and hope and something much older. Storm watched her as she moved, unblinking eyes, dark and thoughtful. Ash tucked his nose into his flank, twitching whenever a new gust rattled the walls. May adjusted the heater's angle so it pointed toward them, then fetched a battered radio from her duffel, setting it on the shelf above the straw. She twisted the dial, but all she got was static, a low, insistent drone that might have been wind or voices or just the ghost of connection. With a sigh, she left it on volume barely above a whisper, a tether to the outside world she could pretend still cared. The storm was only getting worse. The windows flexed in their frames. Ice rattled across the tin roof like claws. May checked her phone, no bars, no messages, nothing. The cabin could have been on the moon for all anyone would know. But she was here, and so were they. She knelt beside Storm first, keeping her movements slow and careful. The big Mustang skin twitched where the ropes had bitten deep, bloody grooves, some scabbed over, some still raw and seeping. May fished a bottle of antiseptic from her kit, mixing it with snow melt from a pot on the heater, testing the temperature with the back of her hand before dabbing it gently onto the wounds. Storm didn't move, didn't even flick an ear, just watched her slow blinks, measuring her patience. She spoke to him as she worked small things, words from old poems and half-remembered songs, stories about the mountain and the people who'd come before. "You're tough," she whispered. "I've seen worse, but not by much." When she finished cleaning his wounds, May unhooked the canteen from her belt and poured some warm water mixed with electrolytes into a tall, battered bucket. She set it down in front of Storm. He sniffed it, ears swiveling, then drank slow, steady gulps, never looking away from her. Ash was next. He'd retreated to the farthest corner, eyes wide, legs drawn tight beneath him. May crept closer, crouching low, holding her hands palm up so he could see she meant no harm. "It's all right," she said softly. "Just need to check your legs, buddy." She worked slowly, inching forward, letting him decide how close she could get. When she finally touched his flank, he flinched but didn't bolt. May saw the angry, swollen rings where the ropes had bitten down the tangled hair crusted with dried blood. She soaked a rag in warm water, squeezing out the excess, then dabbed at the wounds, murmuring all the while. "It's okay. You're not alone. I know it hurts. Just a little more." Ash trembled but didn't strike out. May pressed gently, checking for deeper injuries. His left hind leg was badly swollen, heat radiating from the joint. Infection may be worse, maybe the beginning of something that couldn't be stopped. But for now, she could at least clean him up and give him a fighting chance. She offered the water bucket. Ash didn't approach, so May set it near him, and then eased herself down to the floor, hands folded, gaze averted. She stayed there silent a few feet away, willing him to trust. "Drink when you're ready," she said, at voice no louder than the wind outside. "No one's going to force you here." Ash watched her wide-eyed. Minutes passed. Finally, as if some barrier had broken, he stretched out his neck and took a tentative sip. May smiled but didn't move. It was just after midnight when the next crisis struck. May had been sorting through her dwindling first aid supplies, trying to figure out how much she'd need to ration, before the supply drop started up again when she heard the sharp clang of metal on wood. She spun around. The collar ring she'd just removed from Ash had slipped from the hook she'd hung it on, clattering to the floor. The sound was enough to send Ash into a frenzy. He bolted upright, sides heaving, eyes rolling in panic. He tried to back into the wall, slipped on the straw, and crashed shoulder first into the plywood. He reared, snorting breath, coming in wild gasps. Storm snapped his head up, watching but not moving. May stood absolutely still, hands at her sides, feet rooted to the floor. She didn't say a word, just waited, letting Ash see that she was no threat. He crashed once more into the wall, then froze, muscles bunched, nostrils flaring. May reached up, flicked off the harsh ceiling light, and turned on her headlamp's red filter, bathing the room in a gentle, ghostly glow. The only other light was the flicker of the heater's coil and the pulsing amber of the radio. In the hush, May spoke softly like a lullaby. "It's all right. No one here but us. No one will hurt you now." Ash's breathing slowed little by little, the panic leaking out with every exhale. He stayed tense, but the fight had gone out of him. May didn't move, didn't speak again, just sat 2 meters away, knees hugged to her chest, waiting. It took 10 minutes for Ash to finally lower his head, sides shuddering, and sink back onto the straw. He turned away from her, but didn't hide his face. The terror wasn't gone, but it had dulled to something almost manageable. May let out a long, slow breath and closed her eyes, letting the tension bleed out of her shoulders. She'd seen trauma like this before in horses and people, in herself. Wounds that never healed, only closed over, leaving the nerves raw beneath the surface. The storm continued to rage outside, rattling the shed, sending icy needles of wind whistling through every crack. Inside, it was a different world, a space carved out of fear and hope, lit by the fragile glow of a single bulb and the orange pulse of the heater. May drew herself up against the wall, shivering as the sweat of exertion cooled on her skin. She shrugged out of her jacket, wrung the moisture from the sleeves, and draped it over Ash's shoulders. He didn't flinch. She lit a small oil lamp and set it on the shelf above her head, its flame steadying her nerves as much as it lit the room. Storm had curled up near the heater head, resting on his front legs, but his ears were still trained on May, as if he were keeping watch in his own way. May leaned back, stretching her sore legs, and looked around the little room. Outside, the wind howled like something ancient and grieving. Inside, the world had shrunk to the size of her heartbeat, and the slow rise and fall of breath, the shifting bodies of 2 Mustangs, who had survived what they never should have had to endure. She pulled a faded wool blanket from the stack and tucked it gently around Ash, careful not to startle him. He shifted slightly, eyes flicking open and closed, but didn't resist. Storm shifted, letting out a low snort, then blinked at her. May smiled, her face softening for the first time that night. "You don't have to trust me," she whispered. "Not yet. But I'm here. I'm not leaving." For a long while, no one moved. May listened to the wind, to the crackle of the heater, to the even fragile breaths of the horses she'd dragged from the edge of death. She thought of Echo, the horse she'd lost all those years ago, and felt the old pain bloom in her chest. Maybe this was penance, maybe not. Maybe the world just kept spinning, breaking what it could, leaving the rest to find their way home. Somewhere in the distance, a tree snapped, sending a shiver through the night. May closed her eyes, breathing deep. The Mustangs were safe for now. That was all that mattered. Much later, when the blizzard had eased and the generator's thrum had faded to a lull, May found herself talking to the dark, her words drifting like smoke. "I know how it feels," she murmured, "to be tied up, left behind, and somehow still be here." Storm's ears twitched. Ash let out a quiet, almost hopeful snort. May pulled the blanket tighter around herself, feeling the warmth slowly creep into her bones. The fire inside the one she'd thought had died with Echo wasn't gone after all. It had just been waiting for the right spark. Outside, the storm raged on. But inside the ranger's shed, hope flickered fragile and defiant. A new beginning born from the cold and the dark, taking its first shivering breath. Morning light came to the Blacktail Mountains slow and heavy, a bruised blue seeping through the frost-streaked glass. The storm had lessened, but not ended. The world outside May's cabin was buried in silence, and snow drifts piled high against the porch, the trees bent beneath their white burdens. But the air was less wild now, as if the mountain had spent itself and was content to watch. May woke before sunrise, a habit from years in the field. Her limbs ached from the long night, but she moved quickly, layering on wool and canvas, her hands steady. She checked the shed first thing. Storm and Ash lay curled close to the heater, the straw beneath them packed flat breaths, fogging gently in the still cold air. Storm opened one eye as she entered, but made no move. Ash lifted his head, ears flickering, then settled as he caught her scent. "Morning, May," murmured, voice low and even. "We made it." She set out food she'd ground by hand: oats, softened alfalfa cubes, a little molasses and bran, everything blended to make swallowing easier for horses too exhausted or wounded to chew. She refilled their buckets with fresh, warm water, laced with a veterinary electrolyte mix. Storm stood as she approached, limping but dignified. Ash stayed low, watching, not trusting but not retreating either. May checked their wounds. The rope marks were dark and swollen, the skin split in places, especially around Ash's legs and Storm's flank. She cleaned and reapplied antiseptic, whispering small reassurances, though she wasn't sure if they heard or cared. Sometimes the talking was for her own nerves, to fill the hush that pressed against the walls. But this morning she wasn't alone. She needed help, a particular kind of help. May returned to the cabin and switched on the battered satellite phone. There was only one person she would call. She punched in the number with gloved fingers and listened to the slow, scratchy ring. He answered on the third try, voice crisp as ever Tran. May let out a breath she hadn't known she was holding. "It's me. I've got 2 Mustangs. Found them chained and left for dead in the snow. There's something wrong. Something I can't explain." There was a pause, the faintest crackle of static. "Where my cabin at Blacktail? I need you. I'm coming." She set the phone down, rubbing her arms for warmth, and let herself feel something like relief. She owed Elias Tran her life, a debt forged 10 years ago in another kind of blizzard halfway around the world, when he dragged her and a panicked stallion out of the wreckage of a shelled convoy. He was the best vet she knew, and the only one who would believe her if she said a horse's scars went deeper than skin. The wind rattled the window pane. May watched the clouds move across the peaks and waited. Elias Tron arrived just before noon, guiding his battered olive Jeep through the high drifts with practiced ease. He wore a shearling-lined leather coat, a faded baseball cap, and round steel-rimmed glasses that seemed almost too gentle for his hawk-sharp eyes. His beard was new grayer than May remembered, but the way he carried his old vet's satchel said nothing had changed. May opened the shed for him. The warmth from inside billowed out in a wave, the smell of straw horse sweat and antiseptic blending with the crisp air. Storm was the first to notice rising slowly eyes locked on the door as Elias stepped through. Elias paused just inside the threshold. It wasn't the smell or the cold, or even the sight of battered animals that made him catch his breath. It was the way Storm stared him down, unmoving, alert, with a depth that went far beyond fear or exhaustion. There was calculation there, a memory of being measured, trained. Ash pressed himself into the farthest corner, nose, down, eyes wide, but not wild. He'd learned the scent of May, but this new arrival made him tense. Elias nodded to May, quiet and grave. "Let's get to work." He unpacked his case, lining up syringes, ointments, bandages, a portable scanner, and an array of diagnostic tools on a folded army blanket. His movements were measured, precise, unhurried. He didn't ask May any more questions. He would let the horses answer. He approached Storm, first arms loose at his sides. He extended his hand palm down from above, never from the front, never threatening. Storm stood perfectly still, muscles bunched head level, but didn't back away. He almost seemed to brace himself as if for inspection. Elias ran practiced hands along the Mustang's flanks, murmuring, "Easy now, boy." He found the deep scar at Storm's left hip, pressed his thumb gently along the edges. "Yen's scar," he muttered to May, not looking up. "Military-grade harness electronic mount point, maybe. I've seen this kind of mark on cavalry horses fitted with telemetry packs." He checked Storm's hooves. The fronts had been filed almost flat, the heels left slightly raised, not the way wild horses wore their feet, but the way you'd prepare an animal for hard surfaces, concrete, not earth. "Feel this?" he asked, pressing along the thick tendons at Storm's pastern. "That's a stress callus. Concrete abrasions, maybe years of it." Elias tapped gently along Storm's ribcage, watching the horse tense and release, not from pain, but on command, as if he were still waiting for a handler to signal the next cue. He lifted a penlight, shining it into Storm's eyes. The Mustang didn't flinch, didn't blink, just stared into the light, patient as a statue. Desensitized to glare, Elias said softly. They probably trained him to wear directional goggles, filter lenses, maybe like the old Blue Fire program. He wiped his brow, standing back. His breath misted in the shed's warmth. "This one," he said, "he's seen more than pasture and rain. He's been through something structured. Echo Team Blue Fire, old school anyway. The way he stands, the way he's waiting. I've treated these horses before." May nodded, jaw tight. The words confirmed what she'd already suspected. Not just a ranch escapee, then. Not a chance. Now Elias turned to Ash. The smaller Mustang flinched, but didn't try to bolt as Elias knelt beside him. May moved in, crouching down to lay her palm on Ash's neck, murmuring, "You're safe. He's a friend." Ash's left hind leg was swollen, the joint, angling slightly inward where the bone had once broken and healed crooked. Elias probed it with gentle fingers, frowning. "He's been hobbled or broken, old injury. Never got set right." He shook his head. He checked the horse's hindquarters and found the telltale patch of thinned, puckered skin. "This is from repeated injections, big gauge too. Maybe tranquilizers, maybe worse." He took out his stethoscope, holding it gently to Ash's side. The Mustang's breath rattled soft but distinct. That's a wheeze. Mild pneumonia, probably from being left out in the storm. Elias opened a plastic kit, swabbed Ash's gums for saliva, and fed the sample into a portable analyzer. The screen glowed a faint green, then spat out a string of numbers. "Cortisol's through the roof," he said. "He's been stressed for weeks, maybe months. And there's something odd, his norepinephrine levels are off the chart. I've only seen that with synthetic nerve stimulants used to keep animals alert under duress." Ash jerked away when Elias tried to touch his neck, nearly knocking May over. She steadied him, keeping her voice low. "No needles. Not unless we have to." Elias packed his kit, rising with a sigh. He pulled off his gloves, wiped them down, and leaned back against the stall door, eyes lingering on Storm. May watched him. The shed felt smaller now, crowded with the weight of old secrets. "They aren't just Mustangs," Elias said finally. "The build, the scarring, the way they hold themselves. These are special project animals. Trained. Used." May sat on the edge of an upturned bucket, staring at her boots. "You mean military or someone trying to copy the old programs? The kind of thing Ridrun was doing in Colorado before they vanished." May's hands tightened around her knees. She'd heard the stories about the Ridrun facility, about the Blue Fire and Echo teams, about the horses no one saw except in shadowy photographs and redacted reports. No one ever found out what happened at Ridrun, Elias said. The place closed in 19. One night there was a fire, and the next morning all the files were gone. Some horses were shipped out, some supposedly put down. But nobody ever checked the graves. Silence crept in, heavier than the snow. May looked at Storm. The Mustang met her gaze, steady and ancient, as if daring her to look away. "Forgive us." "It's too late," she murmured the words from the note echoing in her mind. Ash curled on the straw head, resting on his knees, ears flicked at the sound of her voice. May wondered how much they understood, if any of this reached the bruised hearts behind those haunted eyes. If someone was controlling them, once she asked quietly, "Where are they now?" Elias shrugged. "Gone to ground. Or maybe they're out there running the same tricks on someone else. The kind of people who start these projects never really quit. They just change names, move the operation." He looked at her eyes, old and tired. "But these two, they're yours now. Whatever they were made to be now, they're just survivors." May nodded slowly. She stood and walked to the door, letting in a shaft of white morning light. She watched as Storm shifted closer to Ash, their bodies nearly touching. She thought of all the years spent policing the wild, watching animals adapt, learning which ones could be saved and which would slip away, no matter how hard she tried. Maybe these two weren't so different. Maybe for once survival was enough. Outside, the wind had stilled. Snow lay thick and silent over everything, a fresh start. Inside, May felt something shift too, a glimmer of anger, of hope, of unfinished business. She turned to Elias. "I'm going to find out who did this." He nodded. "I know you will." And in the hush that followed, with the Mustangs breathing slow and steady, May realized that the real storm, the one that changed everything, had only just begun. The storm left Garnet Ridge looking like a ghost town from another era. Its houses sunk under heaps of white smoke curling from chimneys, and the main street reduced to a pair of muddy ruts where the plows hadn't yet reached. May's pickup creaked and slid as she guided it through the narrow pass knuckles, white on the wheel chains rattling on the tires. The sun was a pale smudge behind thin clouds, and everything seemed sharper raw after days of wind and cold. She had barely slept. Every few hours, she checked on Storm and Ash, their breath fogging the chill air of the stall. Their bodies growing stronger by inches, not miles. It wasn't the routine that wore her out, it was the questions. She couldn't shake what Elias had said, or what she'd seen in those haunted, unblinking eyes. By mid-morning, she pulled up outside Nora's Provisions, the only grocery for 20 miles in any direction, its red and white sign listing just slightly above the drifted snow. May checked her list: veterinary gauze, antiseptic, a new flashlight, her last had gone dim during the storm, 2 sacks of steel-cut oats. She patted her coat pockets, felt the worn leather of her ranger's badge, and looked over her shoulder at the trailer. Ash's pale head was just visible under the tarp, watching the world go by with an alertness that unsettled her. His ears were pinned, but he didn't try to hide anymore. Inside the store was warm and crowded with a sense of coffee citrus and the musty undercurrent of old wood. Nora Ellis herself was at the front, gray hair tied in a thick knot wrapped in a magenta scarf. She wiped the glass display with slow, careful movements, humming to herself, eyes crinkling in a half-forgotten song. May's boots tapped against the linoleum as she entered, and Nora looked up, barely breaking rhythm. But then Nora's eyes caught something beyond May's shoulder, out the front window. The cloth in her hand paused mid-wipe. She stared for a moment, lips pressed thin, as if calculating what she'd just seen. May felt the air shift, a prickling awareness, the sixth sense of someone who'd walked into more than one ambush in her life. She stiffened unconsciously, fingers brushing the edge of the counter as if for cover. Nora spoke first, her voice quieter than usual. "That horse out there yours?" May answered carefully, her tone measured. "Just rescued him. No papers. Found abandoned up near Blacktail, tied, and left to die in the storm." Nora's gaze didn't leave the window. "Is that so?" She studied Ash, then turned her attention to May's face, as if reading a truth behind her eyes. "Wait here a moment, would you?" Without waiting for an answer, Nora disappeared into the back. May heard the shuffle of boxes, the click of a latch, and then Nora's footsteps returning slower this time. She emerged carrying a folder thick with yellowed paper, its edges stained and curled by years of handling and damp. Nora spread the stack on the counter hands, trembling ever so slightly. She flipped through notes, old catalogs, flyers for hay deliveries, and finally pulled out a sheet that was clearly older than the rest, a flyer printed on cheap, thin paper, its color faded almost to sepia, and the edges brittle. She set it gently before May. "I kept this because I couldn't bear to throw it away." "Look familiar," May leaned in. The photo on the flyer was blurry but unmistakable, 2 Mustangs. One a steel gray with a dark blaze. Storm, there was no question. The other, a cream-colored gelding, ears tipped forward, lighter, smaller Ash. Both wore bright, high-visibility halters and specialized saddles. Their coats were slick, their eyes wide and bright, not haunted. Flanking them was a man tall and broad-shouldered, his face half obscured by the glare of winter sunlight and the shadow of a helmet. His hand rested on Storm's neck with an intimacy that said handler, not just rider. At the bottom of the image, half buried under a water stain, was the headline, "Missing. Reward, last seen Blacktail Ridge Sector 4, Winter 2018. May's heart thudded in her chest. The distinctive tilt of Ash's ear, the way Storm stood alert, his stare challenging the lens, couldn't be a mistake. Nora's voice was hushed, nearly reverent. "I remember posting these all over town. The library, the firehouse, even on the trail map at the South Pass. After the campfire. No one talked about it again. The posters stayed up until they faded to ghosts." May's mind spun as she examined every detail. She traced the outlines of the horses, the cut of the gear, the unreadable features of the man. All those years, all those stories that never made the news. She wondered how many other faces, human or animal, had vanished into the snow without a trace. She looked up. What happened to the place, the training camp? Nora sighed. Not much to tell. There was a facility north of Blacktail, pretty secretive. They called it a protection horse program. Some folks thought it was for wounded warriors. Others said it was security for the national parks. Nobody ever got a straight answer. In the winter of 2018, there was a fire, big one. It burned for hours, but there wasn't a single headline, not even in the local rag. May frowned. No one investigated. Nora shook her head. They said it was an electrical short, but nobody saw bodies, horse or human. By the time the smoke cleared, the entire place was locked up. Fencing came down. The trail to the camp disappeared from the map like it never existed. If you go up there now, all you'll find is forest and ash. May hesitated. Do you know who ran it? Nora's eyes darted away. Rumors. Some private company. I looked for a name once, but everything was blurred or redacted. On some shipment lists, there was just a single letter left, R. That's all. May nodded, the gears turning. She slipped the flyer into her bag, thanked Nora, and finished her purchases in silence. Nora wrapped up the bandages and feed herself hands, slower than before, her gaze never leaving the window. Ash shifted outside, stamping a hoof as if impatient with waiting. Back at the cabin, the world seemed smaller, more precarious. The Mustangs were growing more alert each day, but May now saw them as shadows layered over deeper mysteries. She spread the flyer on her desk beneath the old lamp, smoothing its creased corners, then rummaged through the drawers for her field kit. The station's ancient scanner buzzed as she fed the flyer through. The computer, old but loyal, chirped to life, and May used her UV flashlight to comb over the paper, hoping for something, a watermark, a clue. Anything that would explain how these animals, these lives, had simply vanished from the world's attention. There, in the lower margin, nearly lost beneath the shadow of an old stamp, was a series of raised letters, almost invisible, worn down by time. She adjusted the scan settings, ran a digital color inversion, and watched as the outline emerged in ghostly reversed gray. Red, EQ. She ran the partial through an old photo editing program, pushing the contrast and adjusting filters. Gradually, the hidden letters bloomed to life. Ridrun Equus Initiative. May leaned back in her chair, the name echoing through her mind like a gunshot in an empty canyon. The skin on her arms prickled, not from cold, but from something ancient, a warning she couldn't name. Storm was at the window, watching her with that old, unblinking gaze, as if he too understood the weight of history settling over them. May turned the flyer over, checking for anything else, a signature, a date, a hint. There was nothing but the ghost of a company, a trace of a life erased. She scribbled in her field notebook, Ridrun Equus Initiative, confirmed from Flyer 2018. North Blacktail Sector fire vanished. Who ran it? Who survived? Why these two? She closed her eyes for a moment, letting the silence of the cabin settle around her. Her mind replayed the words from the notes she'd found in the storm. Forgive us. It's too late. Were the Mustangs survivors or witnesses? Did they remember the fire, the fear? Or was there something more, something they'd been trained to forget, or worse, trained to do? As she sat, questions swirling, Ash snorted softly from his stall tail, flicking ears, twitching at a sound only he could hear. Storm tapped a hoof against the wood, a slow, deliberate rhythm that might have been impatience or warning, or just a memory that would not fade. May spent the rest of the afternoon chasing ghosts through digital archives and paper records. Every search for Ridrun Equus hit a wall defunct, URLs, redacted PDFs, files marked confidential or simply missing. She called an old colleague at the State Wildlife Bureau using a burner number, but got only the usual runaround, never heard of them. Are you sure it wasn't Ridgeline Equine? No, sorry, nothing comes up. She clicked through archived local news stories about lost hikers, routine wildfires, missing cattle. Nothing matched the scale of the camp, the horses, the silence that followed. Even the land deeds were scrubbed. Her map showed a patch of government land access closed for environmental recovery, but no records of what had been there before. In the evening, as dusk fell over the mountains, May let herself out onto the porch. The snow crunched under her boots. She looked up at the stars beginning to break through the clouds, so bright, so far, their light unbroken, even by all the secrets on Earth. Storm and Ash watched her from the paddock, side by side, now no longer divided by fear. Their breath curled white in the cold, and their eyes reflected the lamplight like old coins dug up from a forgotten world. She spoke quietly, more to herself than to them. No one abandons a warhorse unless they're terrified of what it remembers. Her voice shook just a little, or of what someone else might want to forget. Storm nickered as if in answer. Ash shook out his mane, stamping twice, impatient or remembering or simply alive. May tucked the field notebook into her jacket, snapped off the porch light, and closed the cabin door against the cold. She was done being afraid of shadows. If there was a secret hidden in these mountains, she would drag it into the open, even if it meant following hoofprints into the dark. Somewhere, a door slammed in the wind. The past wasn't finished with them, not yet. But neither was she. Night in the mountains had a way of swallowing time. The sky outside the ranger station was a dome of obsidian, scattered with fractured reflections of the cabin's lamplight as it shimmered across the snow. May sat at her little table, back to the stove's slow warmth, copying notes from Storm and Ash's last exam, tracking their temperatures, breathing rates, wound status. She wrote quickly, efficiently, a holdover from old field habits. The logs had to be precise. She needed every clue. The silence was companionable, broken only by the faint ticking of cooling iron and the whoomp of snow falling from the eaves. The wind had gentled after days of fury. For the first time in a week, May felt almost safe. Then, out of the calm, a sound she had never heard before. A guttural, raw scream, not a whinny, not a snort, but something hoarse and wild that vibrated the planks under her boots. May dropped her pen, heart hammering as the noise repeated, an unearthly rattle laced with panic and rage. She spun toward the stalls. Ash was on his feet, eyes rolling, sides quaking. In a single explosive movement, he slammed his shoulder against the stall door, the bolt tearing free with a metallic snap. Ash shot through the narrow opening, his hooves skidding on the ice-crusted floor. He vanished into the darkness, a streak of pale gold against the winter's black. May was moving before she could think, sweater pulled over her head, flashlight and med pack, grabbed in one practiced gesture. She yanked open the heavy door boots, crunching on the packed snow outside, and swept the beam left and right. Storm remained behind, not making a sound. He only watched Ash disappear into the night, then turned to fix May with a look, a sharp, deliberate connection that felt almost like a warning. Don't let him go alone. The world outside was newly dangerous. May's lungs burned as she half jogged, half slid down the trail. Ash had broken a ragged series of prints, deep and frantic, the hooves carving zigzags across the hard drifts. The wind had picked up again, dragging loose snow and veils across the beam of her light, but May pressed on hunched low senses stretched thin as a tripwire. She called out once, then again. No answer, but the moan of the wind and the distant snap of something heavy falling in the trees. She followed the prints into a stand of firs where the land dropped suddenly. Her boots caught on an exposed root, and she skidded, landing hard on one knee, then scrambled up again, cursing under her breath. The forest pressed close, branches clawing at her jacket, the ice stinging her cheeks. Her pulse thudded so hard she barely heard the next sound, a low broken groan torn apart by the wind somewhere ahead. She angled her light, and there he was, Ash frozen in place, feet splayed wide, neck extended, tail snapping. May caught her breath. Ash wasn't alone. A body lay crumpled at the bottom of a shallow gully, half buried in snow and broken branches. May scrambled down the slope, the snow collapsing under her. As she drew near, the shape became a man, face-lined, and gray lips blue from cold, his parka shredded and stained. One leg stuck out at a grotesque angle, the knee twisted wrong. The man's eyes opened thin slits of silver against the moonlit dark. He rasped every word torn from somewhere deep. There. A horse. I heard a horse. Thought I was dreaming. May knelt beside him, checking for a pulse. Weak, but there. The skin at his wrist was cold and waxy, but not yet lifeless. She brushed ice from his brow, speaking in the tone she used for colts and wounded rangers. "What's your name?" He blinked, pupils slow to focus. Tobias Reddick. The name tumbled through May's mind, strange and familiar all at once. Ash danced nervously at her shoulder, pawing the ground, tail high, muscles quivering with something close to fear. May worked quickly, stripping off her gloves and tucking a chemical hand warmer under Tobias's jacket. "You're all right," she murmured, lying only a little. "Stay with me." Tobias coughed, body racked with shivers. He tried to sit, failed, then seized May's hand with surprising strength, nails biting into her palm. "Raidrun hasn't stopped. They never stop. They turned horses into weapons." May's jaw clenched. The air around her seemed to sharpen, slicing through her exhaustion. "What do you mean, Storm and Ash? Were they bred for this?" His voice trembled. "More than bred. Designed. Selective lines, cross trials, everything controlled. I was on the neuro team, reflex, triggers, stimulus response training. I left, couldn't stand what we'd done." He gasped for breath, knuckles white on her sleeve. "They used hormone stacks to boost nerve reaction, then trained them with subsonic frequencies, not just for work, but for fighting, for actions without a rider. Remote triggers. Pavlov, but darker." May felt something sink in her chest, a weight like dread and understanding mixing together. And the initiative, she pressed, breath fogging between them. It was just a cover, wasn't it? What was it really for? He nodded, eyes wide, unseeing. Civilian contracts lie, all a lie. Military biotech, testing, deployment, then the fire. I thought I killed them all, burned it all, but I was wrong. His shoulders shook. I saw things no one should see. I ran. His words poured out in fits and starts, a confession given not to absolve, but to warn. May knelt beside him, Ash's flank pressed against her shoulder, feeling the sick, sad truth that had long outlasted the ashes of any camp. She was about to ask another question when the world shifted behind her, a crunch of heavy hooves in the brittle snow. She turned, her light flashing off a massive form coming down the slope, each step precise and careful. Storm. The Mustang's mane rippled his body, framed in the glow. He moved toward Tobias with a silence that was almost reverent, eyes never leaving the man's face. Tobias tried to rise, then fell back, tears cutting tracks through the grime on his cheeks. You're alive," he whispered, wonder and sorrow in equal measure. Storm stopped so close now May could smell the earth and sweat and fear on his coat. He lowered his head, pressed his broad forehead gently to Tobias's shoulder. For a moment, nothing else existed but that simple contact, the breath of an animal who remembered the tears of a man who had done unforgivable things. "I thought I burned you with arrest," Tobias choked. "I thought..." It was all over. Storm didn't move, didn't strike or flee. He just stood, letting Tobias sob into the soft warmth of his neck, letting the past be acknowledged, if never forgiven. May blinked back the sting in her own eyes. "He came back for you," she said quietly, voice low. "You're not forgotten. Not by him." The wind roared for a moment, pelting them with ice. May worked quickly, pulling her emergency tarp from the pack, laying it beside Tobias. She split a dead branch, lashed it to his twisted leg. With a strip of canvas, cinched it tight. Tobias grunted, sweat breaking out on his brow. "You're going to live," she told him matter of fact. "But you'll freeze if we don't move now." Storm watched every movement, a silent sentinel. Ash circled the group, sniffing at Tobias, then glancing up at May as if to ask what next. May looped a rope around her own waist, tied the other end to the tarp, and gripped the knots. "All right, boys," she said to the Mustangs, "clear us a path." The horses seemed to understand. Ash trotted ahead, his pale coat a beacon in the gloom, nosing aside fallen branches and drifted snow. Storm fell in behind May, broad chest, nudging her gently up the worst slopes, not rushing, not faltering. The three of them dragged and pushed and guided Tobias up the long slope, through the stinging wind and the wild night, until the lights of the cabin reappeared, a promise, a lifeline. Inside, May stripped off her coat and boots, stoked the stove with shaking hands. She and the horses hauled Tobias onto the rug near the fire, propping his injured leg on a folded blanket. She checked his pulse, cleaned the worst of the cuts, and jabbed a painkiller into his thigh. His breathing steadied, eyelids drooping as the heat worked its magic. Storm and Ash settled near the door sides, pressed together, heads lowered. May found herself talking to them as she worked. "I don't know if you understand me, but if you hadn't run tonight, he'd be dead out there." The wind moaned around the eaves, but inside the little cabin, the fire blazed bright and steady. Tobias's hand crept out from under the blanket, fingers curling around a fold of saddlecloth that still smelled faintly of Mustang. As the painkillers took hold, Tobias opened his eyes one last time. His voice was barely more than a thread. "They're still out there. North Ridge. Edge of the old quarry. There's no map, but if you find the dirt track past the third ravine, that's the way in. The old stables are beneath the stone." May bent close, heart pounding with dread and determination. "How many?" she asked softly. "I don't know," he whispered, voice already drifting. "But they're training more. And selling them. Don't let them do it again." His grip tightened, desperate, then faded. May squeezed his hand, held it for a moment, felt the warmth ebb. "I promise," she said. "This time someone will come back." Tobias's eyes fluttered shut. Storm stepped closer, nostrils flaring, then laid his head gently against May's shoulder, the closest he had ever come. Outside, the wind hammered the mountains. Inside, the past was laid bare and the future narrowed to a single purpose. A promise spoken in the dark beneath the watchful eyes of horses who had carried secrets for too long. The sun rose on the Blacktail Mountains, barely breaking through the cloud cover. The storm had left behind a landscape of sharp silence, crusted snow. Fractured light, the world clean and cold as a confession. In May's cabin, everything seemed briefly peaceful. The Mustangs slept standing their flanks, pressed close. Tobias, pale but breathing steady, lay bundled near the fire. Only May was awake, heart thrumming with the leftover adrenaline of a sleepless night. As soon as the first light allowed, she set up the battered Ranger laptop on the narrow kitchen table. Fingers numb with fatigue, she began to organize everything she'd gathered since the night she'd found Storm and Ash in the storm. She encrypted every file before attaching them to her message, Tobias's handwritten notes, a feverish scrawl of diagrams and warnings lines crisscrossing like old scars. The rough map of the old Ride-Run compound, drawn from memory corridors, snaking underground, entry points circled with shaking hands. Photos of Storm and Ash, one taken at the cabin, another matched with the faded flyer from Nora's store. A scan of the ghostly words, Ride-Run Equus Initiative, uncovered under UV light proof of a shadowy project that was never supposed to be found. May compressed it all into a single file, double-checked the encryption, and prepared her message for Carmen Voss, the one federal contact she could trust with something this strange, this dangerous. Voss had a reputation, hard-edged, stubborn, quick to laugh, but never without her guard. May had met her once years before in a freezing New Mexico barn after a raid on a ring of illegal military horse traffickers. They'd exchanged more secrets than small talk, and May remembered the warmth of Carmen's gloved hand on her shoulder, the way she said, "It's never over." Not really. In the body of her message, May typed only one line. "You said there were stories that hadn't ended. Maybe this time we can finish one." She pressed send, watched the progress bar crawl across the screen, then leaned back, staring at the wood grain of the table. Outside, the sky was brightening just a little. It took exactly 90 minutes for the reply to arrive, a new record, even for Carmen. May's laptop buzzed with the encrypted notification. She slid on her headset and clicked open the secure call. Carmen's face appeared in a grainy window hair, shorter than May remembered lines, deeper at the corners of her eyes, but the same directness and the same focus. May Whitaker Carmen, said, her voice rough with sleep and something sharper. "I can't believe you're alive. And I sure as hell can't believe those two are still breathing." May kept her face blank. They didn't make it here by themselves. Someone chained them up and left them to die. I don't know if that means mercy or desperation. Carmen exhaled, eyes narrowing. "I've started pulling up the Ride-Run files from 2019, what little there is left. May, these records weren't just deleted. It's like someone went in and rewrote the official history. Half the system acts like Ride-Run never existed, and when you try to search for it, the queries bounce, like the files have a shadow version just out of reach." May felt a chill but pressed on. "I have a map. Tobias Reddick, he survived the fire, or thought he did. He claims there's a hidden camp north of Blacktail Underground. Says he was part of their neural enhancement team. Gave me entry point supply lines, the old stone chamber. I'm sending everything." Carmen nodded, already typing. "We'll run the data through the overlays. Give me a few minutes." May waited, watching the small loading bar on her screen flicker as the encrypted feed pushed gigabyte after gigabyte to Carmen's secure drive. In the stalls, Storm stirred, ears twitching at the digital clicks. 10 minutes later, Carmen was back, her screen split between May and a series of satellite images. "Okay, here's what we've got." She tapped her stylus, highlighting a patch of white-gray on the map. This area, 6 hectares north rim of Blacktail, marked as environmental freeze since 2009. Supposedly closed for reclamation after mining ended. But get this, it's not on any of the updated forestry maps. No coordinates, no trail logs, no service records for snow plowing or wildfire prevention. Carmen clicked through images. This one's from a civilian drone 3 years ago. See that shadow right angle's not natural. And here, Military Satellite 2011 shows tire tracks what looks like a staging area. By 2014, everything's covered in new growth, but the ground is wrong, a faint H shape here. It's either a covered structure or the world's most suspicious fire break. She zoomed in, pointing. That's not reforestation. That's camouflage. And these shadows entry vents probably for an underground facility. We're running thermal overlays, but with the snow, it's hard to tell what's heated and what's just sun on bare stone. May leaned forward, eyes fixed. So it never burned. Or if it did, someone made damn sure the evidence disappeared. Carmen nodded grimly. Exactly. They used the fire as cover, then erased themselves from the map. We've seen this before in narco camps. Turn the land into a black hole, plant trees over the scars, wait for the world to forget. Only here it's horses, not drugs. The Ridrun crew. They're ex-military, but with biomed backgrounds. Their real money came from off-the-books animal sales, registered as rescue or relocation shipped through shell companies. She flipped her tablet, showing a list of missing animals, faded names, sale logs with aliases and code words. The fire in R18, I bet they staged it to dump the last evidence and relocate. All the rescued horses that year, none of the numbers line up. We found receipts for horses delivered to private contractors, even a few embassies. Someone is still running the show. They just don't want you or me to find the front door. May was quiet, letting it settle. Outside, the world felt smaller, as if the mountains themselves were closing ranks. Carmen continued, her voice tight. No one hides better than someone who uses nature to cover nature. If you want to bury a lab, you plant a forest around it. You don't dig deep, you build sideways. And the best camouflage a story about environmental recovery. No one checks the soil under a new pine grove. She pulled up a last image, a color-coded schematic: red for old mining roads, green for new tree cover, blue for unregistered clearings. We think there are two main structures still intact. One at the original main entrance, one farther east, near the quarry line. If Tobias's notes are right, there's a main corridor between them, half collapsed, but the ventilation system is probably still accessible. That's where you'd move stock in and out. May's mouth was dry. How soon can you get a team in Carmen's mouth twisted? That's the problem. The request has to go through 3 levels. I can get backup, but not before 3 days from now. And if we go in without a warrant, it's my badge on the line and yours. May's voice was flat. I don't need a team. I need coordinates. Carmen grinned, despite herself, something fierce in her eyes. You never change, May. Always on time, never waiting for permission. I'll send you the latest drone overlays and the GPS entry points. Watch for false trail markers. These people learned from old survivalists. Most of their traps are natural pitfalls, spring wires, even snow bridges rigged to collapse. Like, don't trust the obvious path. She hesitated, then added, and May, watch your back. If they know you're coming, they'll run. Or worse, they'll clean up. May nodded. Understood. I'll check in when I can. The call ended with a series of secure handshakes and a final loaded silence. May closed the laptop, pressing the lid until it clicked. The world outside was all blinding white, but her mind was sharper, more focused than it had been in days. She stood, joints creaking, and looked out at the paddock. Storm and Ash stood side by side, now muzzles pressed to the window. They watched her, not with fear, but with something closer to expectation. May walked out into the morning, the air crackling with cold, and stood by the fence. She reached out, letting her hand rest lightly on Storm's forehead. We're almost there, she whispered. One more trail. Ash nickered softly, tail flicking as if in answer. May tightened her coat boots, biting into the snow, and went back inside to begin packing. Maps field kit, 2 days of rationed satellite phone. If she waited, the evidence would vanish, just like every secret ever buried in these woods. This time, she wouldn't let the trail go cold. The sky over Blacktail glowed with the pale promise of midday. Far below, beneath a forest grown from deliberate forgetfulness, the map that wasn't on any map waited for a reckoning. The snow had only just begun to soften when the team assembled at the edge of the Blacktail wilderness. 6 figures in forest green and black, every movement deliberate, every word measured. May stood at the front satellite map in one gloved hand, Storm and Ash at her heels. Behind her, Carmen Voss checked the latches on her tranquilizer rifle, an infrared camera, her face set in the calm of those who've made peace with uncertainty. Dr. Elias Tran boots, still caked with mud from the last rescue, carried 2 medical kits and enough sedative for a herd. The others, agents from the Forest Service and the Federal Animal Protection Task Force, moved quietly, each shouldering more gear than fear. May glanced at Storm and Ash, no halters, no ropes, just trust. It was the Mustangs who led the way, moving at a confident ground-eating walk. Their heads never lifted, but they navigated the snowy ridges and tangled brush, as if following memories only they could see. The team trekked single file through thigh-deep drifts and over wind-scoured rock breath, clouding the icy air. For 3 hours they climbed in silence, save for the crunch of boots and the soft snort of horses. When they reached the L-shaped stone marker Tobias had drawn, not one of them doubted they were close. Hidden behind the marker, faint tire tracks etched frozen mud, impossible to spot from the air, but unmistakable here. Carmen signaled a halt. May crouched, running gloved fingers over the rutted earth, then nodded to the others. The team fanned out, creeping behind Storm and Ash as they wound through dense firs and up a shallow ridge. At first, the place seemed like nothing, just a scatter of low, weather-beaten sheds, the kind you'd find at any forgotten trailhead. But up close, the camouflage fell apart. Fence posts made to look like saplings, training posts painted the color of birch bark, but scored with metal wire paddocks half buried under layers of fake moss and old matted hay. The ground beneath their boots warmed slightly. Elias knelt, brushed back needles, and found a line of black pipe leading from a vented shack pumping heat from an unseen source below. May stepped into the largest shed. It was a trainer's station, but wrong every corner bristled with tools of coercion, shock prods, metal bits, harnesses lined with circuitry syringes stacked in plastic trays. There was a board above the door, chalk faded almost to nothing. "We make warhorses, not friends." The team shared a look, something like revulsion, something like rage. Down a ramp behind the main shed, they found the underground stone stable. The air was close sour with ammonia and fear. Storm and Ash hesitated, then pressed on, Storm's ears pinned, Ash breathing fast. Inside, the first thing May saw were eyes, too many, all reflecting green in the flashlight beam. 17 horses stood in stalls, barely wide enough to turn. Their coats hung in strips, their ribs sharp beneath patchy hair eyes, wild or hollow. Some shrank from the light, others pressed forward, desperate for touch. 4 made no sound, not even a breathy whicker. Elias checked, and his jaw tightened. Their throats bore fresh, angry scars. "Vocal cords cut," he murmured, voice shaking. A few stood, blind eyes, clouded faces scarred by burns. Elias pointed to a scorched training grid on the wall, muttering, "Wrong lasers unfiltered." They never stood a chance. 2 were tied to poles' legs, grotesquely bent. They watched May with a mixture of agony and defiance. May's heart hammered. Storm stepped forward, stretching his neck toward a trembling old gelding in the nearest stall. He touched muzzles. The old horse gave a shuddering sigh and sagged against the wall eyes, fluttering closed for the first time in what, weeks, months, years. "This isn't training." Elias said softly, "It's torture for obedience." No one replied. The team worked in silence, Elias and 2 agents giving sedatives, Carmen and May opening latches and coaxing the weakest horses out, Storm and Ash, leading the most terrified down the corridor to the snow-bright day. It took an hour, maybe 2, to get all 17 out. The moment the sunlight hit their coats, several collapsed legs folding, as if the air itself was too soft to believe. But there was one stall May couldn't open. She heard a faint, steady knocking like a heartbeat slowed to a crawl. She knelt, peered through a gap in the rusted steel. Inside was a girl, maybe 13, face streaked with dirt and sweat-red hair knotted to her shoulders. Her fingernails were bloody clawing at the planks. Next to her, a pregnant chestnut mare lay heaving barrels, swollen eyes wide with pain. May broke the lock with the butt of her flashlight. The door swung open and the girl scrambled away, pressing herself against the wall, hands shaking. May knelt. "My name's May. You're safe now. What's yours?" The girl stared at her, then at the horse. Her voice was a croak. "Evie." Elias hurried in, checked the mare's breathing, then gently pried the girl's hands from her coat. Evie clung to him, whispering over and over, "If she dies, they'll put me in the electric room. If she dies, they'll put me there." May wrapped her arms around her, rocking the girl in the flickering gloom. "No one's putting you anywhere," she murmured, voice trembling. "You're coming with us. Both of you." Carmen appeared in the doorway, nodding to May. "We have a live witness," she whispered. "Now the whole system will have to answer for this." Outside, the chaos built trucks, rumbling radios, crackling agents shouting over the panicked whinnying of horses. May spotted a figure bolting away from the commotion, a man in a dirty leather coat, trank gun in hand. Hair wild. He ran for the woods, feet churning the snow. She recognized him, the camp supervisor, as the one Tobias had described. May shouted, "He's running, don't let him get away." Before anyone could react, Ash bolted a pale streak over the drifts, snow exploding in his wake. He closed the distance in seconds, moving with the focus of a predator, but the grace of a survivor. The man turned, raised the trank gun, but Ash feinted left then right, coming up hard and fast. He skidded to a halt in front of the supervisor, reared hooves flashing inches from the man's face, and let out a low, guttural roar that vibrated through the trees. The supervisor slipped, falling backward into the snow, eyes wide in terror. For a moment, he seemed to expect the horse to attack to finish what the trainers had started. But Ash stood his ground, neck arched, ears, flat hooves planted. He waited. May sprinted to the scene, out of breath, but determined. "Ash," she called, voice steady, "stand down." Ash blinked, the fire in his eyes fading, and he stepped back, lowering his head. May dropped to her knees beside the supervisor, snapping cuffs onto his wrists. She turned to Ash, her smile shaky but fierce. "You did it, buddy. You made your choice." The rest of the team swarmed the clearing, Carmen covering the man with her trank rifle. "He's the last link," Carmen said. "We get him talking, we get the rest." Storm and Ash circled back, nudging each other, tails high. For the first time since May had known them, they seemed not just free, but proud. The operation wound down in the hours that followed, agents calling in choppers, veterinarians, treating wounds, Evie wrapped in a blanket, May by her side. One by one, the horses were loaded into rescue trailers, their eyes tracking every movement. May stood at the edge of the compound, watching the first rays of sunset catch the frost on Storm's mane. Carmen joined her arms, folded. "We did good today," Carmen said, voice rough. "But it's not over. The paperwork, the hearings," May shook her head. "Let them come. For now, these horses are safe. That's enough." Carmen smiled, the lines at her eyes softening. "You know, I always wondered if anyone would care this much. Most people, when they see this kind of cruelty, they turn away." May's voice was quiet but certain. I turned away once. Never again. Night fell over Blacktail, and for the first time, no one was afraid. Within hours of the operation, federal agents descended on the Ridrun Equus compound. Floodlights illuminated the false canopy, throwing harsh white against the shadows where for so long only pain and fear had lived. The remaining horses were loaded into padded trailers, their heads wrapped in soft cloth to block out the chaos. All the while, the forensic teams moved through the compound with deliberate care, gloved hands gathering every scrap of evidence, vials of blood, marked with coded labels, computer drives, locked with layers of encryption, medical machinery, still warm from recent use. Most chilling were the files' reams of digital data, cataloging not only the horses' injuries, but the methods used to break them, training logs with biological feedback scores, video archives of reflex tests, and handwritten charts that tried to disguise cruelty as science. The old surveillance cameras, somehow still working, had captured long hours of Evie's small face as she moved through the compound, feeding, cleaning, sometimes simply sitting beside a sick animal, her hands trembling, but never cruel. The men and women arrested that day looked nothing like the monsters their deeds suggested. One technician had eyes that darted everywhere, unable to settle. Another, whose specialty had been reflex override, spent his first interview asking after the horses by number, not by name. There was even an investor, gray suit, clean shoes, who'd never set foot on the property, but whose money had paid for syringes and synthetic hormones. Carmen Voss, the one who had once tracked wolves across the borderlands, now stood at the center of it all, notebook in hand, her jaw set, hard as stone. These people didn't just break the law, she told the press. They broke something sacred. They destroyed trust, the possibility of partnership between human and animal. Now the system will have to relearn what it means to be part of nature, not its master. The hearings dragged on for weeks. May, summoned as both witness and rescuer, sat in quiet dignity at the back of every proceeding. She listened to testimony, Evie's small voice, recounting the rules of the compound, Elias describing in clinical detail the injuries he'd treated Carmen, narrating the web of money and cover-ups that had kept Ridrun invisible for so long. Through it all, Storm and Ash stayed close sometimes, waiting in the field outside the courthouse, sometimes just a quiet presence in the barn, where May spent her nights between sessions. The authorities offered to move Storm and Ash to a federal reserve, where proper care could be guaranteed. May listened, then shook her head. They aren't evidence. They're not property. They're survivors, and they belong with someone who knows what it is to outlast the world's worst day. So May became the first civilian in county history to adopt 2 combat Mustangs. She didn't do it alone. Carmen, Elias, and a patchwork of volunteers helped her turn the old ranger station into something more. The barn was rebuilt, the paddocks expanded. When spring arrived, May herself mounted a new wooden sign at the gate, each letter burned by hand, Echo Range, where silence becomes strength. It was not a sanctuary in the old sense, not a zoo or a place for curious tourists. It was a place for the broken to mend at their own pace, a quiet ground for healing. The horses that arrived bore all manner of scars. Some couldn't whinny, others shrank from touch. Storm became the quiet leader, wandering the fields with no halter, no saddle, but never straying far from the new arrivals. Ash, skittish once, now steady, greeted each newcomer, showing them the safe way to the water trough of the gentlest patch of grass, the spot where the sun was warmest in the late afternoon. May's cabin, once just a ranger's outpost, filled with new sounds, the thud of hooves on packed earth, laughter from volunteers, the low murmur of Evie reading aloud to the horses at dusk. Evie, for her part, was given every choice. The state offered foster homes therapy, a scholarship if she wanted to leave. But when they asked, she looked at May, at the wild horses grazing in the evening sun, and said, I want to stay. I want to help. May turned the old attic into a tiny room. Evie's room where she could pile books, tape up photos, and look out the window at the range. In the mornings, Evie was first to rise, shivering into her boots, to throw hay fluff straw and brush out the horses' tangled manes. Sometimes she spoke to the animals in a voice so soft, May had to strain to hear. Other times, she sang old lullabies from a life she rarely spoke about. The horses listened, especially the broken ones. Elias visited every week, showing Evie how to use a stethoscope, how to check for colic, how to read the subtle signals in a horse's ear or twitch of the tail. You don't fix an animal with orders, he told her. You fix them by listening to what they're trying to say, no matter how quiet it is. At first, Evie barely spoke above a whisper. Her hands shook, her eyes darted to every sudden sound. But as the months passed, she began to change. She named each new arrival, sometimes after a flower, sometimes after something only she understood. She began to laugh sometimes so brightly that even Storm lifted his head to listen. She learned that not every problem needed fixing, that sometimes it was enough just to be there, quiet and steady, while a frightened animal found its own way back to trust. May did not teach her by command. She taught by letting Evie watch as Storm, untethered and unsaddled, still circled back. When called no bit, no spur, just an old whistle May had learned from her father. Sometimes that was all it took to remind both of them. Freedom wasn't about escape. It was about choosing to return. The land itself began to change too. Volunteers built new fences, planted wildflowers, and seeded grass in places where nothing had grown for years. The wounds of the Rid Run compound faded first slowly, then all at once, as green spread over bare earth, as laughter and hoofbeats filled the silence, where there had only ever been pain. One late afternoon in April, with the sun melting into gold behind the foothills, May found herself standing at the fence line, hands resting on a charred piece of wood. She traced the letters she had burned into its surface long ago, her fingers following the words, as if they might give her some final answer. Not every creature needs training. Some only need to be set free. The field beyond her hummed with life. Storm stood at the crest of the ridge mane, blown wild by the wind, his gaze fixed on the horizon, as if searching for something just beyond the world's edge. Ash galloped down the slope, Evie on his back. No saddle, no reins, her hair flying, and her laughter ringing clear as a bell. For a moment, May felt time dissolve, leaving only the memory of Echo. The horse she had lost, the piece of herself she thought was gone for good. But now, in the golden hush, she understood Echo had never really left. His name was written in the patience with which May waited for a frightened horse to approach, and the gentleness with which Evie offered an apple to a new arrival, in the way Ash circled back when May called him by name. Storm's gaze met May's across the field. He didn't move toward her. He didn't bolt away. He simply stood calm, sovereign, utterly himself, until at last he turned, not in flight, but in quiet, wordless trust. For the first time, May realized that the absence of restraint was not chaos. It was a gift. That evening, when the last rays of sun vanished and the hills softened to blue, May sat on the front porch, Tobias's old notebook in her lap, its battered cover now rebound in soft leather pages filled with new stories and old regrets. The air was cool, alive, with the distant nickering of horses and the gentle thud of hooves moving through grass. Evie appeared, a blanket slung over one shoulder. She sat beside May without a word, both of them watching as the first stars came out. In the field, Storm lifted his head, whinnied once, a soft sound, not a call for help or cry of fear, but a reminder that he was there, that he always knew when it was time to come home. May looked up at the sky, the night brimming with 1,000 points of light. For years, she had believed that silence was punishment, a void left behind by loss. But now she understood. Silence could be a gift too if you learned how to listen to it. She leaned close to Evie, her voice barely more than a whisper. Silence isn't a punishment if you know how to listen. Evie's head found May's shoulder. She didn't answer, but May felt her nod, the simple weight of understanding that comes only to those who have survived the long road through darkness. The stars weren't there to guide them. They were there to remind them that for those who have once been lost, there are always roads invisible to everyone else. Roads that lead eventually to home. And so, as the night settled gentle and complete, over Echo Range May, Evie, Storm, Ash, and all the others found a quiet they could finally trust. The reins were off, the wounds no longer gaping, but healing. And in the soft hush that followed their souls at last, were free.
Thank you for staying with us until the end of this story. We'd love to hear from you. Share your thoughts in the comments below, and let us know your favorite part. If you enjoyed the journey, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to our channel for more captivating stories like this one. And don't miss out. Hit the notification bell so you're always updated on our latest content. Your support truly means the world to us.